Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The funeral home coffee tasted like it had been cooked twice, once in a tin pot, and again under the heat lamps. People said the right things, then looked past me at the spray of lilies and the framed photo that made Daniel look like he'd never left our kitchen. I nodded and folded paper napkins into smaller squares until they wouldn't fold anymore. Mrs. Whitfield. The woman in the navy suit waited until I looked up. Clean bob scuffed boots that didn't match the suit Montana Practical. Marisol Vega, Daniel's attorney. I stood because my mother raised me that way. You can call me Mara. She led me into a small side room that smelled like lemon cleaner and hymnals. From a document pouch, she set 3 things on the table: a brass key on a leather thong, a manila envelope, and a thumb drive taped to an index card. Daniel executed a transfer 3 years ago, she said. Alder Ridge Ranch. Title is already in your name. Taxes prepaid through the next assessment. There's also this. She tapped the drive. 12 voice memos he recorded, 1 for each month. The office password is on the card. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Starlight 2001. The key was heavy and warm from her palm. It could have been a church key. It could have been a promise. He told me never to go out there, I said before I could stop myself. The sentence sounded like it belonged to someone timid and younger. Said it was a money pit, said it was cursed. I can't speak to curses, Marisol said, but it's no pit. On the way out, people pressed my hands, promised casseroles, told stories that made Daniel larger, kinder, funnier than he ever allowed himself to appear in public. On the sidewalk, the wind cut down from the gulch and rattled the flagpole ropes. I closed my fist around the key and felt the leather bite. 2 hours later, I was out of Helena the radio. A low hiss. The road ribboning between cottonwoods gone the color of old brass. A pronghorn stood in a field like a statue and watched my dust go by. Daniel used to say Montana makes you feel honest because there's nothing to hide behind. He had said other things too on the nights the old nightmares visited. Don't ask about the ranch. Don't go to the ranch. Let that door stay shut. The gate found me by its own gravity, black iron simple lines, an alder leaf welded in the center of each panel. Alder Ridge was cut into the crossbar letters clean as a brand. The key slid into a padlock fat with weather and turned like it had been waiting for my wrist. The drive ran a half-mile curved, and then the house stood up from the land. Not the sag-back farmhouse I'd pictured, but a long, low 2-story with a deep porch and windows that caught the sky. The paint wasn't new. It had settled. The gravel was raked. Someone loved it often. Inside smelled like cedar and saddle soap. I kicked off my funeral heels by the door and stepped onto plank floors that held a whisper of heat. The great room rose into beams the color of Wheat River rock stacked high around a wood stove, a long table scarred with 100 meals I didn't cook. On the walls, horses ran oil charcoal photographs, manes torn by wind I could almost hear. He'd pretended not to understand the way animals rearranged my breathing. He'd remembered anyway. A note waited on a narrow desk by a window. Play the first one. Next to it sat a little black speaker with its cord already fed behind an old tower computer. The monitor glowed with a login box, and the cursor blinked like a heartbeat. I typed Starlight 2001 and pressed Enter. The desktop opened to a single folder for Mara. The first file was named month0.wave. My hand went cold. I clicked. Hey, Whitfield. His voice came out of the speaker plain as daylight, the way he sounded when he called from the grocery store to ask if we needed eggs. If you're listening, you did the opposite of what I told you, which makes sense, because grief changes the physics of every rule. I'm sorry I made you carry this mystery. I'm sorry for a lot of things. He drew a breath. I heard it catch. 3 years ago, the doctors told me my kidneys were clocking out early. Not a crisis yet, just a quiet exit sign in the corner. I didn't want our days to turn into waiting rooms, so I built something instead. The ranch isn't a monument. It's a tool. It's for you. The room shrank and widened at the same time. Outside, the light knifed low across the pastures. I sat on the window seat where the cushion had an elbow-shaped dip and listened to my husband talking from the month before we bought new winter tires. You're going to find files and maps that don't look like our life. He went on, a dry smile in the words. Don't let the jargon scare you. When you see the blue tape, that's the west side. Trust the blue tape. And when people show up trying to tell you this place belongs to them, remember who turned those first screws and who paid for every board. A truck engine murmured distantly hard to place road, or my nerves tying themselves into new knots. Daniel's voice softened. I kept you away because I couldn't drag the past out here with us and still get the work done. It's not a secret anymore. It's a house with our names on the deed and heat in the floors. Open drawers, open doors. Let the air in. The recording clicked off. Silence turned into the hum of the refrigerator and the dry rattle of grass at the foundation. I hadn't cried at the service. I cried then, quick and efficient, like a storm that knows when to leave. When the shaking stopped, I stood across the room and opened doors the way he told me. The kitchen was industrial clean knives magneted to the wall labels on jars in Daniel's tidy block letters. A chalkboard over the pantry read, "Feed, water, fly nets," with dates and check marks I didn't make. Someone named BH initialed every row. A mudroom held lined-up boots, all men's sizes, but not Daniel's brand. The office smelled like toner and dusted hay. On a metal shelf, blueprint tubes wore blue painter's tape and black Sharpie Westfield, Conda logs, test wells. The words meant more than they should have and less than they would tomorrow. I walked back to the window because the light had changed again. A black SUV turned into the drive and came slow, the careful slow of people who want you to see them coming. When the engine cut, the quiet rushed in so hard my ears rang. 3 men got out, one in a camel coat, and a smile too quick, one with a legal pad, and one who stood with his hands in his pockets like he'd been born waiting. They didn't look like Daniel. They looked like a story he never finished. I locked the front door and watched them split the porch between them the way men divide a room at a conference table. The one in the coat knocked a friendly knock like we had agreed on this hour, and I had set out cookies. "Miss Whitfield," he called. "Family, we should talk." Behind their SUV, dust uncurled and hung in the air. I didn't answer. The knock came again, less friendly. From the desk, the monitor cast a square of light across the floorboards and touched the brass key where I'd set it. My eyes kept dropping to the thumb drive, to the folder named for Mara, to the second file waiting in the list, quiet as a sealed letter. Tires crunched on gravel. Another vehicle eased in white with the county star on the door. Sheriff Owens stepped out, thumb hooked in his belt, a man who could pivot from neighbor to authority with the angle of his shoulders. He spoke to the 3 men. Papers came up. A signature line glinted. The man in the coat lifted his chin toward the house and knocked once more, softer than before, as if sound itself could trespass. I slid the key into my pocket and set my palm flat against the wood where the deadbolt sat. The house settled around me. The wind found the chimes at the back corner of the porch, and the alder leaves on the gate rattled like coins. I reached for the lock. I turned the deadbolt because Sheriff Owens was looking straight at the door and not blinking. When I opened, I stepped onto the porch and pulled it shut behind me, hardwood cool through my socks. The 3 men angled to see past me anyway. "Miss Whitfield," the one in the camel coat said, easy smile back in place. "Conrad Rowan. This is my brother Mason, and that's Ethan. We're Daniel's family." "Then you know his last wish," I said. "The title." Conrad gave Sheriff Owens a practiced half shrug that meant, "See how reasonable I can be." Mason lifted a folder and fanned out forms. Ethan watched the road like a bird dog and said nothing. Afternoon, the sheriff said to me, neighbor first, "These gentlemen brought a civil request for a voluntary inspection. No warrant. You're not required to let anyone in. I suggest you show me whatever you want me to know and you call your counsel." "Give me a minute." I left them to their courtesy and crossed the cool, great room to the office. The tower hummed. The thumb drive waited like a small dark seed, but I kept my hands off it. On the metal shelf, the blueprint tubes wore blue painter's tape and blocky labels, Westfield, Con D, logs, test wells. I pulled a flat binder instead. Alder Ridge recorded docs. Inside, Daniel's tabs marched like a parade deed, mineral rights, property taxes, county recorder receipts. He had file-stamped copies, the recorder's ink odd and blue. Back on the porch, I laid the binder open on the rail. Sheriff Owens read with his finger lips moving just enough to show he meant every word. Recorded, fee paid, mineral rights not severed. That's clean. "It's complicated," Mason said, the way a man says, "Let me complicate it for you. The property has a family history. We're simply trying to ensure continuity." "Continuity doesn't override title," the sheriff said, calm as a fence post. "If you want civil relief, you'll need to seek it through the court." Conrad smoothed his coat. "We could do this friendly today. Make sure the house is secure, the outbuilding safe. We have people who can help." "I'm not missing any help," I said. "You can leave your business cards." Something like a flinch crossed Ethan's face. He pulled a pen from behind his ear and scribbled on the back of a card anyway, then slid it onto the railing, careful not to touch the binder. Ethan Rowan was printed in neat raised letters. Under the address, he wrote a phone number and one word, Lily. I kept my face still. I know my daughter's name. The sheriff handed Mason's forms back. "I'd appreciate space for the owner to make calls," he said, already turning those shoulders toward authority. The brothers withdrew to the steps, whispering in a way they thought looked casual. I called Marisol. She answered on the first ring like she had been waiting by the phone with her boots on. "Send me a photo of the paper they brought and the deed," she said. "I'll email the sheriff a statement declining voluntary access and noting your recorded title." Do not let them inside. If they camp on the county road, that's their gas. By the time I slid my phone away, the sheriff's radio crackled. He checked his screen, then nodded. We're clear today, he told me. If they come back with something new, call it in. Conrad took the no with a smile that showed teeth. He tapped 2 fingers to the brim of an imaginary hat and turned down the steps. They didn't leave the property, just rolled the SUV out of view and parked nose in behind a windbreak where they could watch the house and make me watch them watching. The quiet came back in a different shape. Inside, the great room felt too big for one person's air. I walked to the desk and clicked month 02 wave. Hey, Whitfield Daniels, said that grocery store cadence back in my chest. This month is the part where I tell you why that blue tape is everywhere. There's water under the west side, not the kind you drink. Brine so salty your tongue would turn inside out. I didn't care about that when I started. I cared about building you a place to breathe. Then I read a paper about lithium and brines and how you can pull it out without strip mining a square mile of pretty country. A chair creaked on the recording like he'd leaned back too far in the office and caught himself with his boot. I hired a small crew quiet enough to keep my brothers deaf, he went on. We ran conductivity logs on some test holes, sent samples to a lab. You'll find maps and charts that look like someone else's life. You'll also find coffee stains on the corners because I'm still me. He chuckled and it broke something with more grace than crying. 2 names will show up in the papers because rumors leak, he said. Redwood Geothermal and Blue Iron Minerals. If you see either on a business card, call Marisol before you call anyone else. The file clicked off. I opened month 03 .wave and let his voice keep time with the floor heat. If you're in the west field, he said, take a meter. The conductivity will spike where the aquifer flares. Trust Boone on distances. If you can't find Boone, look for his initials. I told him to sign everything he touched. The chalkboard in this kitchen flashed in my head, BH, over and over on the feed chart. I was still thinking his initials when a diesel eased up the drive and a hand waved through the glass. The man at the mudroom door wore a canvas jacket clean at the shoulders and torn at the cuffs. His hair had gone gray in a way that didn't ask for comment. He stood with a patience I recognized from good horses and old mechanics. Boone Harper, I asked through the screen. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'm sorry for your loss. It hit like a brand when you don't see the iron. I nodded because words weren't going to make it past the first gate. He dipped his head, not embarrassed by my silence. I feed at dawn, he said. Still do if that's permitted. Daniel said if anything happened, I was to listen to you. He glanced past me, not nosy, just measuring. You got company. They're out by the windbreak. He followed me into the kitchen and stopped at the chalkboard without pointing. They called last week, he said. Men who don't say who pays them. I didn't answer. Good, I said, and meant it. You want to see the west side, he asked after a moment. We'll stay away from windows. We cut behind the barn, then angled toward a low concrete hump, half swallowed by bunchgrass. Boone kicked straw off a hatch and pulled a ring. A ladder went down into cool air. He threw the lights and the room came up out of the dark in rows, filing cabinets, rolling maps, a workbench with a handheld meter, and a mason jar of gray water labeled W3 1820FT in Daniel's writing. This was a root cellar, once Boone said. He poured new walls and decided paper lives longer under dirt. He showed me a map pinned to cork with roofing nails. The west field was drawn in pale contour lines. The blue tape in the office made sense here. The west was blue, the east green. In blue were dots with little flags, W1, W2, W3. Conductivity logs jump here, here, and here, Boone said, tapping with a blunt finger. Lab assays came back high for lithium in the brine. I don't say that to rush a thing, just so you know the names that'll start circling. Redwood will talk clean. Blue iron will talk quick. He unscrewed the meter's cap and dropped the probe into the mason jar. The screen blinked and climbed. That's stupid salty, he said. You don't drink it. But people make batteries out of salt these days. Daniel said the ranch wasn't a monument, I said. A tool. Sounds like him, Boone said, and put the cap back on like he didn't want to spill more of my life than I could mop. On the way up, we both heard a truck door slam. Boone paused on the ladder and listened with his head the way horses do. New tires, he said. Rental, not the brothers. Back at the house, a white SUV with a discreet logo parked behind the sheriff's unit. A woman in a field jacket stepped out, hair braided down her back, clipboard tucked under her arm. She shook the sheriff's hand like she'd been taught how to respect a county line. Miss Whitfield, she said when she saw me. Dana Pritchard, Redwood Geothermal. Mr. Mason Rowan called our office. If this is a bad time, I can go. That depends, I said. Do you work for the Rowans? I work for Redwood, she said. We don't step on private property without the owners say so. Good Sheriff Owens said. He gave me a look that said, your porch, your rules. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. Lily lit the screen. Mom, are you at the ranch? I'm 20 minutes out. Ethan said I stopped reading before my blood warmed past polite. You're welcome to wait inside, I told the sheriff and the woman from Redwood. All conversations happen at the table. No tours. Conrad and Mason reappeared from the windbreak, like men who had always been headed this way. Ethan came slower, hands empty. The sheriff held up a palm. "No one's here as law," he said. "We're here as witnesses to good manners. Keep it that way." The dining room's long table had scars like a map. I set out a pitcher of water and a row of jelly glasses because I didn't have 8 matching anything. Boone stood by the doorway, not imposing, just present. Dana Pritchard took a seat and folded her hands. The brothers arranged themselves like they had rehearsed where to put each shoulder. Conrad near the head mason with his legal pad, Ethan at the end, where you can leave if you decide not to stay. A small car eased into the drive and cut its engine. Gravel ticked as the heat left the exhaust. Lily's steps were quick through the mudroom, then the kitchen. She stopped when she saw the room and did the math out loud with her eyes. "Mom," she said, and I watched the hard thing in her face crack and set again in a better line. I pulled a chair for her. She sat between me and the water pitcher close enough that our sleeves brushed when we reached for our glasses. "Names for the record," Sheriff Owen said from the doorway pen out. We said them one by one, the room learning how each sounded against the window light. When it came back to me, I looked at the brass key on the table, its weight, its warmth, and then at the faces across from us. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." Names were said. Pens touched paper. The room learned our voices. The sheriff took a chair at the end, angled to watch without leaning in. Boone stood near the hutch where the good plates would go if I had any. Dana Pritchard from Redwood set her clipboard flat and kept both hands on it like she'd been raised right. Conrad smiled at the table, not at any person. First, our condolences. He began the script broken into neat blocks. Second, we're here to keep the Rowan legacy intact. Daniel made moves near the end that were impulsive. We'd like to steady the ship. "The ship has a deed," I said. Mason rested his legal pad on the wood, uncapped a pen. "Titles are the beginning of a conversation, not the end," he said gently, as if gentleness could file teeth down. "This property has multiple equities: family, historic, economic. We propose a management trust. Everyone wins." "Define everyone." Lily said, her voice rock solid in a way that pulled my eyes to her face. "A third to you," Conrad said, as if generosity were a fresh-baked pie he'd carried in. "A third to Mrs. Whitfield. The remainder to the Rowan brothers. Shared stewardship. Sensible guardrails." "And the Westfield?" I asked. Mason didn't blink. "Undevelopable terrain. We exclude it for liability reasons and streamline costs by concentrating improvements in the house core and the eastern pasture. The west is scenery." Dinah's face didn't move, but the clipboard shifted a fraction. The sheriff wrote something down I couldn't see. I slid the binder of recorded documents to the center and left my hand on it. "Here's what's not a conversation," I said. "The recorded title in my name, the mineral rights attached, the taxes prepaid, the injunctions Marisol can file in an hour if one of you breathes wrong at my daughter again." I called Lily. Ethan set eyes on the wood. I told her stories about Daniel when we were kids. That was the whole truth. Lily looked at him like she'd already cut those stories into parts to see what glue held them. She turned to me. "May I?" I nodded. She took my phone, slipped one earbud in, and tapped a file I'd queued in the kitchen when I'd gone to get water. We'd pulled month04.wave from the office just before the room filled. I kept my eyes on Conrad while I watched my child's face receive her father's voice. "I'm sorry," Mason was saying, open-palmed, "but grief can color competence. If Daniel had—" Lily lifted her earbud out and set the phone between the glasses. "He recorded messages," she said evenly. "He said you'd try to split us and call it stewardship. He said you'd exclude the West because you didn't bother to learn what it holds. You think there's value in a rock pile?" Conrad laughed lightly. "Sweetheart, there's plenty of good land here. We're trying to keep you from a bad deal." "Then let's talk deals," Dana said, voice clean. "Redwood is a third-party developer. We're here because Mr. Rowan," she nodded toward Mason, "called this morning. We do not enter land without permission, and we do not negotiate through intermediaries. If Miss Whitfield is inclined, we can outline a non-binding term sheet for direct lithium extraction from brine beneath the western aquifer. No open pits, closed-loop reinjection, independent water monitoring, royalties to landowner. That's the shape of it." Blue Iron's name might as well have rippled under the door on a breeze. Mason stiffened. Conrad's smile lost one tooth. Ethan finally looked up. "Redwood will drag this out for years," Mason said softly. "We can bring in Blue Iron by end of week. Cash today, clarity tomorrow. I'm the only person who invites anyone," I said. "Sit with that reality." I walked to the office, brought back one tube marked Westfield Cond, logs and an oversized binder of printouts. I didn't push the map across the table yet. I laid it on the wood, unrolled it to the first fold, and let color and paper do their quiet work. Pale contour lines, blue flags at W1, W2, W3. A set of numbers in Daniel's block hand at the edge measured depths, conductivity spikes, lab sample IDs, boots scuffed under chairs when the West stopped being a rumor. "Where did you get this?" Mason asked. No gentleness left. "In my office," I said. "Labeled, signed, recorded as to date and content. If you'd like to object to my reading comprehension, we can test it in front of a judge." Dana leaned in only far enough to honor the paper. "Those are field logs, not ours. Whoever ran them knew what they were doing. Daniel hired a quiet crew," I said. "People who used chalk instead of neon." Conrad tapped the map, as if that could make it his. "Field logs are not reserves," he said. "You'll never get capital on this based on some hobbyists." The mudroom door creaked. A man in a dark suit and field boots stood in the threshold palming a card I didn't ask for. "Apologies," he said without apology. "Trent Calder, Blue Iron Minerals. We were requested as well." He nodded at Mason in a way that pretended they hadn't spoken, then at me, in a way that measured the width of my patience. "Requested by whom?" Sheriff Owens asked. "Anonymous tip," Calder said smoothly. "We monitor opportunities. We can put an option agreement on the table right now." "No, you can't," I said. "You're not on my land." "We're standing in your dining room," Calder said, used to confusing presence with consent. "My permission extends to listening," I said. "It does not extend to paperwork." I turned to the sheriff. "Are we done letting men walk into my house because a phone call made them brave?" "We're done," he said, and let the word be a wall. Calder smiled with an extra tooth and stayed anyway. "An option at 7 figures," he said, "to no one, and everyone with escalation if tests confirm grade and flow is better than a 10-year science project." Dana didn't look at him. "Closed-loop pilot in 18 months, she said to me, if lab assays align with these logs, and the county is reasonable. Independent hydrologist retained by you. Public reporting, neighbor well protections. Redwood, Mason said, is making promises they won't be around to keep. Blue Iron will cut a check." Lily poured water into a jelly glass and drank like the day depended on it. "Uncle Ethan," she said, surprising all of us with the title. "Did you know about the Westfield? Or did you just like the photos?" Ethan's jaw worked. "I knew Daniel kept coming out here," he said. "I didn't know what he was doing. He said not to ask." "That makes 2 of us," I said. I laid my hand flat on the map where Daniel's numbers lived. He told me after. Like this. Mason slid his legal pad back as if the table had tipped. "All of this is premature," he said. "The only non-premature item is Daniel's state of mind when he signed. We will challenge competency." Boone cleared his throat. It was almost a cough, almost a laugh. "He signed in June," Boone said, voice mild. "He loaded hay that afternoon with me and drove post straight as a hymn. If he was incompetent, he hid it by outworking 3 men. We have notarizations," I said. "Recorded receipts. Physician letters that say chronic, not catastrophic." "You'll lose before you finish your first motion." Conrad's smile finally cracked. "You want to make this adversarial? You walked into my house and started slicing up land you don't own like pie," I said. "The adversary arrived with you." I looked at the sheriff. He met my eyes and gave the smallest nod he could without writing it down. I opened a different binder. Boone's the one with cloth tabs and a hand-lettered spine that read Rowan Ledger, and took out a single manila envelope. On the front in Daniel's block, civil file hold for witness. I set it in front of the sheriff's elbow. "Document retention," I said, "in case a court needs to know why men with loud checkbooks suddenly grew quiet." Mason's pen stopped. Conrad's hands flattened on the wood. Ethan stared at the envelope like it might name him kindly, and he knew it wouldn't. "Are you threatening us with criminal allegations?" Mason asked, soft again. "I'm telling you I can tell a complete story in sequential order," I said. "It starts with a 19-year-old named Daniel who learned fast about forged signatures and men who called theft a misunderstanding. It ends with those men signing something simple and keeping it." Calder cleared his throat as if to be remembered. "Blue Iron doesn't take positions in family fights," he said. "We buy rights. When you're ready to sell, I'll be at the lodge in town." "You won't," the sheriff said without lifting his pen. "Lodging license says you're booked out by the airport." Calder blinked, recalibrated, and smoothed his tie like the world was still in his shape. He tucked a card by the water pitcher and stepped back toward the mudroom, taking one last look at the map, like a man in a museum who touches the frame when the guard blinks. Dana hadn't moved. "Miss Whitfield," she said, "Redwood is prepared to submit a non-binding memorandum of understanding that outlines environmental parameters first and economic second. If you choose to read it, it will be on your terms." "Your terms," Mason echoed, incredulous. "Landowners," Dana said. Lily reached across and slid the card Calder had left to the center, like a piece you don't want on the board. "I have the email you sent me," she said to Mason. "The draft proposal with the Westfield excluded. You told me it was for simplicity. You didn't say you thought it was valueless. You counted on me not noticing." Mason opened his mouth and then closed it, because the room knew the measurement of that lie. Ethan pinched his eyes shut once and opened them on me, not on his brothers. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said quietly, "if we sign something today, if we leave this alone, would you—" He didn't finish. He didn't say, "Keep the envelope closed." He didn't say, "Let me call Lily again." He stood in the space between old habits and new weather and waited there. "The only paper I signed today," I said, "is a no-contest agreement concerning title and mineral rights, and a no-contact agreement concerning my daughter. In exchange, we all go back to our lives without the court learning what's in that envelope." "And Redwood," Dana asked, just to be correct. "And Redwood gets to email me a draft," I said. "Marisol gets CC'd. The end." Conrad looked at Mason. Mason looked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at the envelope like a man looks at a fence he hopes he never has to climb. The quiet got long. Dana didn't fill it. Boone's breath was the kind that knows how to wait. Conrad sat back, the decision ripping through his posture like a seam losing thread. "Draw it up," he said to Mason. "I want to see counsel," Mason said, still making small shields out of syllables. "You're looking at him," Conrad said. "For the no contact," Lily said steady. "It includes no calls to me, no indirect messages through friends, no gifts, no anonymous job offers, and no chance meetings. Put it in plain words." Mason wrote. The pen scratched. He asked me for a printer. Boone brought out a battered brother from the office and set it on the sideboard. Paper spooled out that smelled like a school secretary's desk. We read. Dana raised a hand for one phrase without prejudice and explained why it belonged. The sheriff initialed the margins as witness. Ethan signed first letters careful, as if neatness could make the meaning softer. Mason signed last, a flourish that didn't quite flourish. Conrad's hand hovered over the line and hesitated half a breath. He signed as if old muscle memory had finally remembered how to write the truth. I signed where Marisol had taught me to sign. Lily printed her name as a named party on the no contact, and then set the pen down with both hands like something heavy. Mason gathered his copy. I gathered mine. The sheriff slid the envelope a little farther from the edge, safe from elbows and persuasion. Conrad stood. "Miss Whitfield," he said, hatless finally, out of scripts. "I hope you find whatever you think you're looking for here." "I found a voice," I said. "That's enough for today." They went out one by one, the mudroom swallowing their shoulders first, then their coats, then the echo of good boots on old boards. The SUV's engine turned and held, then dwindled down the drive in a long, even sound I didn't watch with my eyes. We sat there with the map still breathing on the table. The house made the warm noises of a place that's told itself the storm can pass. The sheriff clicked his pen closed and slipped it into his pocket, like this had been a normal day. "Call me if those cards change," he said, and left his chair against the wall the way you leave a friend's ladder where they can find it again. Dana set her clipboard on the map's bare edge. "Thank you for letting me be in the room," she said. "I'll email your counsel. No paper leaves until she looks. He'll—" "Good," I said. Boone boxed the printer, slid the drawer shut, and took the spent paper scraps to the trash like they might cut someone if left careless. Lily traced the blue flags at W1, W2, W3 with one finger, not touching the ink. I rolled the map slow, the paper making that dry whisper that sounds like lids closing on boxes that don't need to be opened anymore. Dana shook Boone's hand like he had a name, which he does, and then took her leave the way she came, boots clean at the shoulder and torn at the cuff. The light outside had gone thin and silver. Wind combed the bunchgrass in one direction, then changed its mind. The alder leaf on the gate clicked against its weld in a small, true sound. I put the brass key back in my pocket and felt its worn edges against my palm. Lily stood chair legs singing against the plank floor. "Mom," she said, and it landed between us like something whole. I nodded and let the words sit with the map tube, the envelope, the glasses half full. The house breathed, the table held. The day did not break. After the cars were gone and the sheriff's chair leaned back against the wall like a tool you plan to use again, the house exhaled. Boone boxed the printer. Dana left with a nod that felt like respect rather than an angle. Lily and I did the dishes without speaking much, 2 jelly glasses, one pitcher, the map tube standing in the corner like a rolled flag. Wind came up after dark, shouldering the eaves and combing the pasture by sound. I slept shallow and woke to the kind of winter light that makes every nailhead look honest. Boone knocked once and put his head in the door. "Gate," he said. "2 vehicles, 3 Rowans and 2 men I don't know." I called Marisol before I put on boots. She answered on the first ring. "If you want the sheriff there, I'll make the call," she said. "No contact stands for Lily. If they speak to you, make sure it's on the record." "On the record," I said, and pinned the little silver brooch Daniel gave me our second Christmas to the shoulder of my sweater. He'd laughed then and said, "Now you have a microphone that doesn't look like one." I hadn't asked what he meant. Sheriff Owens arrived ahead of them, parking where the alder leaves on the gate could see his hood. He stood in the entry and rubbed his hands once, not for warmth but for readiness. The front door opened to careful boots and measured faces. Conrad came first. He looked cleaned out, coat hanging different color wrong under the skin. Mason carried a leather folder like a shield. Ethan kept his eyes on the floorboards as if the plank seams might spell mercy. Behind them, a man with a physician's bag and another with a briefcase that said expensive more than useful. Catherine, Conrad said without the script. "Thank you for seeing us." "You asked through counsel," I said. "That matters." We sat at the same table as yesterday, the map gone, the wood bare. The sheriff took the end again. Boone stood where he could see hands. I poured water because my mother raised me that way, and because people talk truer with a glass in reach. Conrad folded his fingers on the grain. "I have leukemia," he said. "No preface, no performance. It's aggressive. The oncologist recommends a transplant. We've tested family, no match." The doctor spoke like he'd practiced with a metronome. "HLA typing begins with a simple blood draw. If Ms. Whitfield's daughter is willing, we can determine compatibility quickly. If she matches closely enough, a marrow or peripheral blood stem cell donation is possible. Risk is low. Recovery is measured in days." Mason slid a single-page release across the table as if paper were kindness. "Voluntary screening only," he said. "We understand the agreement in place. We're not contacting Lily. We're asking you to consider asking her." Lily stood in the doorway, thin as a fence line, having heard enough to come no farther. She met my eyes and stayed where she was. "Lily's decisions belong to Lily," I said. "That's our starting plank." Conrad nodded like he knew the feel of a plank that doesn't give. "We're asking for a chance," he said. "That's all. There's a way sorrow lands when it has no costume left." It sat in his posture. It didn't make the room forget the map or the envelope from yesterday. It just took its chair. I reached into the drawer of the sideboard and brought out a flat envelope with Daniel's handwriting printed square across the front. "Last Resort C." The paper had the weight of something carried more miles than you'd guess. "Daniel left this for a day like this," I said. "It's addressed to you." Mason's eyes narrowed. "We don't consent to—" "It's a letter," I said. "Consent is for other things." Conrad took it with both hands, careful as if it might cut. He slipped a finger under the flap and drew out 3 pages, read the first, and stopped moving for a long handful of breaths. The doctor looked at the sheriff like he wanted permission to ask what was on the page. The sheriff looked at the water pitcher and waited. Conrad passed the second page to Mason. Ethan leaned in the way a younger brother leans when he is tired of being fed last. I watched their faces try to keep the old map of their family while the roads redrew themselves. Mason's mouth made the shape of no and quit. Ethan's lips parted and didn't find a word. "My father had twins with another woman," Conrad said finally, voice low enough you had to lean toward it. "Adopted out in Spokane in '79. Daniel found them through a donor registry 2 years ago. DNA confirmed. Names. Contact information updated last spring. He verified HLA markers, the doctor said, unable to keep medicine from his face. If true, there's a non-trivial chance of compatibility." Conrad kept reading. At the bottom of the 3rd page, his thumb hesitated like it had caught on a burr. He folded the letter along Daniel's creases and put it back in the envelope. "Why didn't he tell us Ethan asked the table, not any one person?" "Because he wasn't in the business of managing your father's secrets," I said. "He was in the business of keeping the people he loved intact." Mason glanced toward Lily's silhouette in the doorway. The sheriff's pen made a small sound on paper that reminded him where the lines lived. Mason kept his eyes on mine instead. "If the other siblings decline," he said carefully, "would you allow us to speak to Lily then?" "You're not speaking to Lily now," I said. "You're speaking to me. If the people in that letter say no, then Lily will decide on her own time with full information. No pressure, no stories, no end runs." The doctor nodded once, a man acknowledging terms. "We can provide independent counseling," he offered, more human than clinical. "Any decision should be hers." Conrad touched the envelope like it could warm. "Thank you," he said, and it didn't sound like a debt so much as a clear sentence. He turned to the sheriff. "We'll need a copy certified for our counsel." "The letter stays with me," I said. "I'll provide your attorney a scan through mine. You can have those contacts, and you can have the truth that comes with them." Mason folded the release he'd brought and slid it back into his folder. "No contact remains," he said. "We respect it." Lily stepped forward, then not to sit, just to be seen. "I don't hate you," she said to the wood more than to the men. "I just don't know you. That's not a door you get to kick." Conrad's hands trembled once and steadied. "Understood." We stood. Chairs made that sound chairs make when there's no yelling to scrape against. The doctor gave me a card with a number that was a cell, not an office. The attorney said nothing that mattered and followed the others out. On the porch, the wind had gone thinner and the sky had moved toward the hard polish of late morning. Boone walked them to the steps because he believes in certain kinds of escort. The sheriff watched their taillights pass the gate and close the distance to the county road. Inside, the dining room looked like a place that had survived 2 different kinds of weather. I set the envelope on the sideboard, not hidden and not displayed. Lily came to my shoulder and read Daniel's handwriting the way you read your own name when you see it on old paper twice to be sure. "You okay?" she asked. "Enough," I said. Boone brought in 2 mugs that steamed and smelled like the coffee he makes when something's been heavy. He set one by my hand and one where Lily's hand would find it. Sheriff Owens scribbled a line on his notepad and tore the page free. "Visit voluntary," he said as he pocketed the rest. "No contact observed. Request made. Response given. We're square." He tapped the brim of an imaginary hat and left his chair where it belonged. The door closed behind him with the soft click of wood that has learned its own fit. We stood a while and let the house remember how to be quiet. Wind shifted and touched the chimes at the back corner. Somewhere in the barn a halter rang against a peg like a small bell. I took the brooch off my sweater and put it in the desk drawer with the spare keys and a folded napkin I couldn't explain. Boone gathered the jelly glasses and carried them to the sink. Lily leaned her hip against the table and blew on her coffee. The alder leaf on the gate flashed once when a cloud moved and went still again. By mid-morning the frost burned off the fence rails and left the boards dark as coffee. Dana Pritchard came back in a county car, a banker's box balanced on her hip. Marisol's voice rode in on my phone speaker, crisp and awake. "We'll do this at the table," I said. The long plank held out its scars like a record of good meals and worse weather. Boone set a pot of coffee on a trivet and stood by the hutch. Dana lifted a slim stack of papers. "Non-binding term sheet," she said. "Direct lithium extraction from brine only. Closed-loop reinjection. Independent hydrologist selected by you. Continuous monitoring at neighbor wells. Public reports. Decommissioning plan. Reclamation trust funded up front." She looked at my phone. "Council will want to mark a few phrases." "Council is marking," Marisol said. "Page 2, paragraph 3. Strike commercially reasonable efforts and replace with express obligation. Add a line that fieldwork pauses if baseline data go sideways." Dana nodded, penciled it, and waited for me to read. I took my time. The paper smelled faintly of toner and whatever Redwood used to keep its office polite. I underlined once and circled twice. Boone poured coffee into jelly glasses because that's what we had. When we were done moving commas and erecting fences out of words we signed, Dana's signature was small and neat, like she had learned to put authority in the language and not the flourish. I wrote the way my grandmother taught me, legible and without apology. Boone witnessed. Marisol's voice said, "Copy me," and Dana slid a second set across. "Baseline crews parked at the county line," Dana said, closing her pen. "They'll collect today if you say so. Hydrologist is neutral. She answers to the data and to you." "Let them work," I said. "Stay out of the west pasture where the mares are turned out. They'll test your nerves faster than your equipment." Boone walked the crew down to the draws and the low places where water lingers. They flagged discreetly blue for Redwood, yellow for the county. The hydrologist, a woman with sun lines and a field book thick with other people's wells, took temperatures and conductivity like a person who believes numbers can be good manners. I watched from the fence line with my hands on the top rail until the horses lost interest and dropped their heads to graze. In the studio, the light came from the north like it had been ordered that way. The easel stood ready, the big canvas Daniel had commissioned leaning blank against the wall until it wasn't. I mixed paint the way you mix memory a little at a time, adding thinner when it tried to fight. First the land ridges and bowls laid down in umber and slate, then the house in its true scale, not bigger than the hills and not smaller than the shelter it promised. In the foreground, 2 riders moved, 1 man, 1 woman, features left soft on purpose. Behind them, a 3rd figure rode in her own line, not following and not lost. By mid-afternoon, the paint had set enough to move. Boone took one end, I took the other. We carried the canvas down the hall to the great room like men carry a door in a storm. The wall above the river rock stove knew where it went. We lifted, breathed, and hung it until the bubble in Boone's level sat sure in its glass. Lily came in with wind in her hair and the horse smell on her jacket. She stopped halfway across the room and took the picture in without needing a map. "You finished it," she said, and there was more in the words than completed paint. "It's time," I said. We stood a long minute with our shoulders almost touching and our hands in our own pockets. Outside, Juniper blew once toward the porch and shook the saddle already off. Boone went to strip tack and check a stone bruise he'd been watching. A red light blinked on the tower in the office. I knew what file it wanted me to open. I carried the black speaker to the window seat and set it down where the cushion holds an old elbow's shape. Lily sat. I clicked month 12 off a wave. "Hey, Whitfield," Daniel said, voice steady as the ranch roads he had learned by heart. "If you're hearing this one, your hands remember how to work. There's a big canvas leaning somewhere. Use it when the picture in your head is louder than the doubts." He breathed and the pause felt like a hand resting, not a gap. "I left you tools. The rest of it's yours." We let the file end on its own click. No lessons. Just a man's tone in a room that carried him correctly. I closed the folder and slid the drive into the top drawer where the brooch lay against a folded napkin and a spare key. By evening, the baseline crew had stowed their cases. Dana signed the log with the hydrologist, leaning her hip against the fender, both of them dusted with the same honest dirt as the rest of us. They shook Boone's hand and Lily's and mine and drove slow down the lane so the alder leaves on the gate could tick them out. I made supper the way I do when I need the house to know it's fed, cast iron onions first, then whatever the freezer gives. We ate at the scarred table under the painting. The map tube stood in the corner like something that had finally said enough. The envelope on the sideboard stayed closed without being hidden. Wind pressed a shoulder to the porch and then stepped back. Juniper stamped once in the paddock and settled. The hydrologist's blue flags at the draw caught a last strip of light and let it go. When the house went quiet, it was the kind that holds rather than the kind that waits. Boone rinsed plates and set them to dry. Lily brought in the halters for the night and left them on their pegs by the mudroom door. I switched off the lamp and the stove fan and the office monitor. The painting gathered what light was left and kept it without bragging. On the porch, the air had teeth again. I leaned against the post and listened to the metal chime at the corner taste the wind. The alder leaf on the gate tapped its weld, small and sure. I put the brass key in my pocket where it belongs and stayed there until the cold asked me to go inside. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.